The History of Things podcast is brought to you by HistoryNet, publisher of 9 different historical magazines, including the Civil War Times, American History, and Military History. Visit HistoryNet.com to learn more, or follow them on social media by searching for @history_net. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoy the show.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to the History Things podcast, season 5. I have to do my own effects. We're still a low-budget show, but we're in our 5th season here. I am joined, as always, it is a pleasure to once again be saying this into a 5th season. Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by one of my best friends in life, one of the people I've had the most pleasure working with in any professional capacity ever. It's wild that we're doing a 5th season. Ladies and gentlemen, you know him. You have loved him. The room can't contain him. Obviously, I'm talking about author, historian, park ranger, Matt Borders. Matty B, welcome. Welcome to the celebration. Season 5, buddy. We're doing it.
Always glad to be back, Pat. Season 5, it is amazing. We're super pumped to be back with y'all for a new season. 5 years into anything is a big deal, whether we're talking about friendships, marriages, life in general. So this is awesome that we've made it this far.
It's a long time if you consider holding on to championship belts. And Matt and I have been holding on to the title for 5 consecutive years. Still the reigning tag team champs of History Things. I challenge us.
Maybe tag team.
Come into the steel cage and get it. But what's neat is we've also gotten a lot better about how we do the production of this show. So as you're going to see going into this season, the audio issues of season 4, the year 2023, have set into the sunset behind us. Matt and I were like cowboys riding off, leaving that crap behind us. I hated, and I know we said it in our year-end episode, but I hated that we had Scott Hartwig on this show in our studio, and my microphone sounded like the Soggy Bottom Boys recording whatever that song was from the movie Through It. Legend man sitting in the studio doing legendary things, me sounding like an amateur, more so than normal. But
I sounded all right.
You sounded great, and that was a great episode. And obviously you guys all enjoyed that too. But here we are in season 5. All that is in the rear view, and we got a big one. Usually January we like to do some quiet and relaxing stuff. We've taken you to the beach before.
Yep.
Speaking of relaxing, we took you to the Crimea last season.
Oh yeah, that's real relaxing.
Well, remember we got there at the end to talk about the Civil War part, so it was the nice, clean, tidy part, as Daryl Rivers told us all about. We didn't, as Americans, I'm going to just speak to my guests. Don't say anything. We can't. You're a secret. We got to unveil it with big majesty. But we definitely acknowledge the Crimea was a mess, and we observed the nice, clean end of it. But we're not doing any of that. We're getting this season started off with a banger. We're getting this season started off with a story that I'll admit I'm not super familiar with. I've only honestly heard it one other time in my life. Matt, admittedly, you know it that well? Not too super well?
For this aspect of the war, no. I pride myself for having a pretty good breadth of Civil War history, and this aspect I do not know.
Yeah, so
I'm super excited to hear it today.
So hopefully by 5 seasons of the show now, when you hear Matt and I say the war, you figured out it's one of 2 wars. It's the Civil War or the Great War. And usually when we say the Great War, it's great. It's in there. You know which we're talking about. So obviously we're going back to the American Civil War, but we're not taking you to the front lines of battlefield fights you might be familiar with. We have no armies of Northern Virginia. We have no armies of the Potomac. No big sexy names like McClellan, Grant, Lee, Longstreet. None of that. We do have a big sexy story. In fact, we settled on how we were going to describe this based on the description we picked was it's one of the sexy ones. You could call it a strike. You could call it a revolt, a rebellion. We called it a miners' revolt, and miners as in like coal miners with the ER and not the OR for all you weirdos out there that just got super, I don't know what, but we'll leave that one right where it is. But we're focusing on a miners' revolt from somewhere deep in coal country in Pennsylvania. Now, I will admit, I know absolutely jack shit about coal. I know that there are two types of coal, more or less, and I know they're in different regions because there's a guy that we're about to talk to that has a whole shtick that covers it. And as much as I read, I still can't keep them straight, which coal goes where. But let's pick up the big. Let's pick up the band. Remember, we hired a band last season to celebrate 50 episodes. They never left. They live in our house now. So let's pick up the band. Let's introduce our guest here. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a public historian who we've known for a very long time. It's been an honor and privilege to call this guy one of our friends and colleagues around town. Ladies and gentlemen, the legendary Jake Wynn. Woo! Jake, welcome to the History Things podcast. How are you, mate? Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. What an intro.
Yeah, you got to get hyped, dude.
Woo!
You got to get hype when you come on this show.
Woo.
Yes, thank you for bringing the energy.
Let me bring.
Yes,
There
Ric
you
Flair,
go.
Ric Flair, ladies and gentlemen.
There
So, Jake obviously is somebody that most of you will be familiar with. If you've been paying attention to the Civil War in the last 10 years, you will likely have seen him if you were looking for stories from Civil War medicine, the Maryland campaign. He's been all over Antietam. If you wanted to focus on Pennsylvania's role in the Civil War, him and a group of friends have been diligently telling the stories of Pennsylvania in the Civil War. So Jake's been around. What do you not do history-wise? Because I did tease that you talk about coal and all that. So, like, what do you not do? Maybe a shorter list.
No, not do. I actually don't do that much with the Great War. So
Well, there you go. There you go.
Yep. So no, I love all aspects of American history, and love to share stories. I love to get into the nitty gritty, the down to the personal level, to tell these kind of lesser known stories. I like to, a little bit of like history hipster.
Yes,
Well,
we're
that's
with
all
that
right.
too.
That's
Before
all
we
right.
get
and
into
it's
that,
definitely gritty when it comes to coal.
yes, for sure. Super. You're going to need a shower after this one, is what we're telling you. But before we get into it, let's talk about you. We always like to get into the personal origin story. Like, how did you get here? Physically, how did you get here, Jake? Like, where did you come from? Like, did you just appeared in this damn studio? No. But, like, how did you get to where you are as a relatively still young guy with a very successful short career so far, all over the place? Like, how did you get from this moment, go all the way back to, like, I like history? How'd you get there?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town in central Pennsylvania. It was a mining town, so it was kind of
Appropriate.
Yep, planting the seed there about loving some local history. I grew up really fascinated with the Second World War. Great grandfather was a kind of flight engineer. Actually served first in the Merchant Marine in convoys in the Atlantic, and always fascinated with those stories, and then kind of transitioned into learning more about the Civil War. I remember going to the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg shortly after it opened, and fell in love with learning about the Civil War and Civil War history, and just kind of took off from there. I always had a passion for history. Grew up going to museums, going to historic sites, and just loved it. Loved the storytelling aspect of it. Was always told that, what are you going to do with you want to study history, you like history, were you going to be a history teacher? And I was like,
well, I got tired of that.
Yeah, I think we've probably all heard that. And I went to Hood College in Frederick, Maryland, and there was going to study journalism. Always had a passion for telling stories, sharing stories about the world, how the world got to be the way it is.
How we got here.
And then was convinced to also study public history. It's where I first learned about the concept of public history. So focus on museums, historic sites, telling stories, not like in an academic sense. So,
Sure.
And I started working for a couple of local organizations in Frederick, and ended up at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. And it's been kind of an ongoing history journal ever since.
That's where Jake and mine's paths cross, because once upon a time, about a decade ago now, Jake and I run into each other, I think through social media originally, but then we figure out same town, so boom, pop into Civil War Museum of Medicine there on West Patrick Street, and one of the first History Things with Pat videos before this show ever existed, when History Things with Pat was the only place to get history things, and I had no clue what I was doing with that. Whatever, I was just making random videos. Jake made the second one I ever did. And I kind of like put him on the spot. I crashed and was like, "You want to tell a story?" He was like, "Sure." And we did Dr. Richard Burr, who's a shady dude.
Yep, it was Civil War Medicine Museum. Just so many good stories, and I think that's where the passion for like the lesser known stories came from. Because I didn't know anything about medical history. I probably subscribed to most of the myths about Civil War medicine when I started working there.
Oh, that they bought the bullets.
Yeah.
Oh, they bit the bullets and all that.
Yep, exactly. And then I learned the real story.
Now, were you at the museum when that museum consulted for Mercy Street?
Yes, I was there.
Was that a cool experience?
I never went on set. So I was really around for the second season, which is they weren't using the museum kind of as consultants on set, but we did some work with saw their scripts.
Because I know that you guys
workshopped
were
that a little
involved in the amputation scene in some way. Maybe consulted. Maybe that's where the bulk of it was. Because I know they put a big deal into getting that right.
Yeah, they spent a lot of time trying to get the medical things correct, which by and large they did, even though it was very experimental. It was kind of they were out on the edge of what was being done during
I was
the Civil
surprised
War.
the syringes they were using, things like that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, if only they would have focused on, the story and like the plot.
That's why I got canceled.
And not having weird conspiracy moments with John Wilkes Booth.
It was detail cool. It was plot poor, extremely bad.
They tried to jam too much into their seasons.
Yeah, but it really did wonders for us at the museum and really introducing the complexity of medical science in the 19th century and adding a layer of interest to the general public that saw the show, that came in and were like, hey, I saw this in Mercy Street. Did this really happen that way? And it really opened up the opportunity for us to have conversation about it in a way that oftentimes, especially from Hollywood productions, we heard about, biting bullets.
Right.
No, they didn't have any anesthesia. And it's just like, no.
Oh, God, in glory. Oh, God, please stop cutting.
Yeah, we need to pull that back, It's like, so in that way it was really good for the museum, and I know personally it gave me a lot of opportunities to get out there in the community and talk about.
Well, I imagine that was the springboard between that opportunity and your work ethic. I think those two things combined into how you got to where you are now, which is much younger than I am and already a legend. So well done. I laugh when I think about Mercy Street real quick before we move on, is that my two favorite parts of that show were that they picked two actors who you are used to seeing in comedic roles, and they played very serious roles. I forget the younger guy, but he's from How I Met Your Mother. Right. But for me personally, I always got a kick out of the fact that we got to watch the guy that invented the expression, if you ain't first, you're last. Gary Cole, the guy that invented that expression as far as us using it, Ricky Bobby, he played the dad in that show, and he was a very serious character, and I just wanted to, first you're last the whole time.
Yep. As a Talladega Nights fan, as a NASCAR fan.
That's right, you are.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So, without going deeply into that, does that movie hit right as both a spoof and as an homage to NASCAR?
I think it's like anything with Will Ferrell. It's it's
crazy.
It's way out there, but I think it's some of it is just so good, the ridiculous sponsorship, plugs at all times, so true.
I love that it seemed like the community of NASCAR got behind making fun of itself, because they got big name people to be involved in that, and
Good
it was
point.
Well, I watched it recently because every once in a while I got to get out of war films and documentaries, just reset my brain, because what we do in reality, it's amazing, but it emotionally sucks from time to time. You're just you get bogged down in it.
Yeah.
So I was like, what's stupid that I can watch? And Prime hit me with Talladega Nights, and I was like, yes, I want to laugh for no reason. I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew and giggle at that crap.
Yeah.
But and I found myself appreciating at various times in that movie that Will Ferrell, doing all his Will Ferrell things, does have more acting depth than we realize, and he hits you with these deeply emotional moments, like him and his dad arguing in the street. I'm like, that's not a funny moment in the middle of that movie. It was very weirdly touching, and I'm like, God, that's that's why I like Will Ferrell, because he does all the cheesy crap, and then he touches your soul really nicely once a movie, and then he goes back to woo. If you don't chew Big Red, then you, right? Anyway. Anyway, so I want to know where were you in life? Actually, before we get into that, I want to tell one more silly story because this is a story that we tell in circles privately, and I realize Jake and I have never told this story together around each other, and I've actually never heard his version of it, but going back a decade with someone off and on, right? You know, you got little moments here and little moments there. And one of Jake and mine's first moments was a just insane moment. I want to hear this from your perspective because I've been telling this story for a long time. But you and I were going to look for evidence of Bobby Lee's f***ery, I believe, one day, right? At Monocacy Battlefield.
Yeah, we were.
We can tell the story because, Matt, wait, real quick. Top secret site, statute of limitations. This is all good. We can talk about it, right?
That's fine.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we decided we were gonna go look at some remnants of some earthworks and such at an old railroad bridge that's still a railroad bridge. It's still an active railroad bridge.
Very active.
And
old railroad bridge.
disregarded many signs telling us not to do what we did.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we went out and walked across a railroad bridge, a certain national park.
Again, one we're not naming.
And one we're not naming, a national park.
That has no affiliation.
Yeah, there's no affiliation whatsoever. And, yeah, it was great, having a grand time. It's a beautiful day. And then we get back to the car and, oh, hello there, National Park Service law enforcement.
Yep. Waiting right for us.
Yep, and so at that point, I just flat out abandoned Pat. I mean, there was
It was a weird moment. Like, what? Neither of us knew what was happening.
Yeah.
It was so random.
Yep, and he had been waiting there for a while because there's not that many places you can hike in this particular spot without being seen. So it's very clear what we did was what we had done and walked where we had been walking. And so, yeah, we get back, and law enforcement ranger really wants to talk to Pat.
Really wants to talk to me.
Yeah, he could give two craps about me.
Yep.
So that's the part where I flee the scene. And I guess this is where Pat can pick up his version of the story.
So to be fair to us and to be clear, we did go through a part of the fence where there is no signage, so we could play the fool.
You went through.
Let me tell you. There was no signage there. That is on the agency to secure all points of entry and egress. All right. This was a unprotected egress. There was no signage. We just, we didn't open the door. We just walked through it, okay? All right? We didn't open the door. But when Jake realizes this is something that is more focused on me and kind of pieces out, I begin to get very concerned because this is like, oh, they want to talk to me. I am a weird person, as you all have figured out by 5 seasons of doing this, but I'm not a weird like that or a bad person. Like, I don't do crime, right? You never heard me joke, do crime? Like, I don't actually do that stuff. Like, so I am like, what is going on? Turns out I have a suspended driver's license. I didn't realize I had an Easy Pass fine that had been lingering, and so my license was suspended. Great. They can't actually write either Jake or I a trespassing ticket because they know we went through the one part of the fence that has no signage. That's why this officer, who we will not name, but Matt may or may not know this guy super well. This guy had a boner for this moment because he realized he couldn't get the thing he wanted, but he ran my tag and it came back as the driver of this car's license is suspended. So all he needed to do was run my ID, and then he finally had something. So he did that. And I got officially cited for driving in a national park with a suspended license, which is funny to me because he didn't catch me behind the wheel of the car. So I, in the moment, was kind of so caught off guard by this because it's one of the first times I've hung out with Jake. This is such a weird thing. Like, I don't know what's happening. So I just kind of rolled with it. The older me is like, dude, why didn't you beef on this cop right away about the fact that he didn't catch you doing anything? Like, nah. So, but either way, so I take it. So real quick, right here in the studio, we'll have Parker take a picture of this. I actually keep the United States District Court violation notice that I was given from this because of how insane the moment was and the rest of the story is. So I asked Jake when we sat down to record today. We're gonna have to redact that, by the way, Parker. Just was you take a photo. There's some deets on this photo when it gets posted. Like, you can't know about me personally, but we'll show you that this does in fact exist. But so I get issued this possession of or driving on a suspended license, national park, blah blah blah. Because it's a federal thing, I have to go to federal court, which means in Frederick, Maryland, that's on Fort Detrick. So I have to go onto an Army base, and what ends up happening turns out to be one of my favorite moments in my life that is not directly related to getting married, having children, buying a house, starting this show type of stuff. It is like, I cannot describe to you this moment. It is so surreal. I'm going to tell you, but having experienced it, it is wild. So I get to court. Officer gets to court. Officer has been mean-mugging me as if he never left the field he interrogated Jake and I in all those weeks back. Like, he is not thrilled to be there, which, by the way, in case you're listening, officer, it's all your fault that we're both there. You wrote the damn ticket. So, but either way, I'm getting the guff. And we finally get through the whole docket, and I'm like the second to last person there. And I can't tell if the bit of mercy that's about to come stems from the ridiculousness of this moment, or if it stems from the fact that the judge has had a long day. But either way, I get to enter my plea. I say guilty with an explanation because I wasn't fighting it. I didn't know it was suspended. And I tell him essentially, my friend and I, history nerds, we're doing some history investigation, made an honest mistake, didn't realize we couldn't walk through here. There was no gate. Like, it's the only part of the fence at the time that has no gate. I don't know if it's been corrected. It probably has been in the interim, but at this one time, there was no gate here. And I say that and so blah, blah. So basically, I frame this whole thing like we're just two nerds that were chasing history stuff. Because what they wanted to find, and Jake, you can attest to this, when we crossed the bridge, what kind of litter was all over the place back there, dude?
Oh, I don't even remember.
All right, I do, because it was part of my defense. There was blunt wrappers and beer cans. I mean, there was like younger people were going back there and doing what younger party people do. So I imagine to some degree that was the expectation of who they were going to find coming back through the gate. You know, instead they found two dudes with backpacks full of books and maps about the battlefield, and the one officer who is not as serious as the main guy, the antagonist of this story, so to speak, he actually realized that this is just some weird-ass situation and starts to ask Jake and I about the battle at one point. Like, we're talking to him about the history, and I don't know if that was to vet that we said who we said we were history nerds, but clearly in 10 minutes they were like, all right, these two are who they say they are. This guy's just got a suspended license. So back in front of the judge, I'm framing this whole thing like we were in a world where people are effing off left and right, and especially because we agree, we saw the evidence of all this partying. Like, we were just two history nerds just trying to understand our nation's history and our worst moment a little better. And so the judge, I didn't say it that eloquently.
Wipes the tear from his
eye. I've been able to tell this story for a long time, so it's gotten a lot more eloquent, but I'm not missing the spirit of what I was saying. And so what happens next is the judge literally turns to the officer and goes, "Do you mean to tell me that you wrote this poor young man a ticket? Out of all the other people in this world who deserve citations and tickets, you deserve," I forget the word he used, I'm going to say gigged, because that's the word I use. You gigged this kid over trying to pursue U.S. history because his license was suspended and you didn't even have him in the car. And immediately he said, he decides we're not moving forward with this case. It's over. Says to me, "I apologize, have a great day," and I leave the room. I have no idea what happens to said officer next, but I can tell you that that officer still works at said site, and I have spent the last 10 years volunteering at said site, doing this nudge, nudge, wink, wink with him as this, like, fish that got away, because he remembers this story, and he expected to, like, get me in super deep trouble, and it all kind of backfired on him in the moment of court. So I love that. And when I found out in the beginning of our recording that you didn't know the second half of that story, I was like, Jake, I have a tale for you, bud.
Yep.
I had to go to court. Here's the citation. Here is my evidence in Exhibit A to prove that I had to deal with that crap long after you fled the scene.
Yeah.
So it's good to tell old stories, because honestly there's a lot of old stories with certain colleagues around, but some are better than others, and this is one that it deserves the light of day. It doesn't deserve to stay in my basement. So now you know. Once upon a time, Jake and I were badass.
Yep.
Now we're still
Walking
badass.
around with backpacks full of books.
Books and maps. That's right. I think we were also musing that we would potentially be able to find rail lines, maybe, that had been torn and wrapped, because they were doing the Sherman-y bow tie type thing.
I think we were looking for the blockhouses out there.
That's what we were looking for, but I think we were talking about what else might be out here at one point, and we were like, because they were attempting rail damage, they were attempting. We were definitely looking for the blockhouses. I remember that.
They destroyed that bridge in '62.
Did they?
Yeah. And
in the undisclosed national park.
Yeah, the one that we're obviously no names, no dates, no places.
Attempt to destroy it again in '64, but it doesn't work so well.
That's right. In fact, Union soldiers use it to escape one side of the river to the other. That's what Jake and I were really doing. We were reenacting. Actually, we were going the wrong way.
We were going the wrong way.
We were going the wrong way. We weren't reenacting. We were investigating. We're sticking to our original story, and it's already been tried in a court of law. So come at me. You can't. Double jeopardy laws. Ha ha. We're guilty as shit. We trespass. No, I'm just kidding. But it's such a random thing. It's such a random, like, when you think about the, all the punk things that people do when they're younger to, like,
this was not one of those.
Right, but it's like, it's like they do stuff like that to, like, go sneak a beer, go sneak a cigarette from mom or dad or something like that. Jake and I are like, you want to go find earthworks and blockhouses?
Yes.
And it's like, what about that sign? And it's like, what about that part right there where there's nothing? And we're like, shoot. Like, no questions asked. It's good. All right, back to legitimate history. That was a great time. When you were younger, I imagine that you realized there was an intersection between the Civil War passion you were developing and the local coal region history passion that you had, I guess, been born into. Where were you in life? Were you really young when you realized this intersection, or did that come to you as more of a developed and, I guess, student or trained historian?
So it came pretty young. So the area where I grew up in Pennsylvania is just right next door to Schuylkill County, Pottsville, and so there is a very deep vein of interest there in Civil War history, because they have a particularly famous unit that serves in the war in the U.S. Army, the 48th Pennsylvania, famous for using their mining knowledge to detonate a mine under Confederate lines at Petersburg.
That's right.
During the siege. And so that is despite the fact that it is disastrous in the end, the Battle of the Crater, they claim the part that was a success.
Right.
In blowing a huge hole in Confederate lines.
They're like, our part worked. I don't know about the rest.
Exactly. So Civil War history is really kind of beloved there, and something that they talk about quite freely, and talk about that, that especially as it relates to something else they're very passionate about in Schuylkill County, which is talking about their coal heritage and the mining history that exists there. So as I got into college and started doing more research, I started to find that it was a lot more complicated than this story of these guys. Schuylkill County sends a huge quantity of soldiers to the U.S. Army. About 13,000 men from Schuylkill County
a single county.
serve in the U.S. Army during the war, or the U.S. Navy. And despite that fact of having these huge numbers of recruits, it also is one of the areas of, as I learned, of fiercest antagonism towards the Lincoln administration, towards the war effort in general, and especially towards abolition. And so as I started to get into the weeds of that story, it became fascinating to me, because it has these connections to another famous story from Schuylkill County about 10 years after the Civil War, and the so-called Molly Maguires.
Right.
And so
I was going to ask if there's a connection to
yes,
this. Okay.
So it is a direct connection
Awesome.
between the two stories. And I'm not the first historian to tread these waters. There are several great books out there that tie this history together between labor history, Civil War history, history that is unfortunately very rich of ethnic conflict in Pennsylvania, in these industrial areas, and all of those stories kind of weave together in Schuylkill County, and that's really what I found very interesting to study and wrote about quite frequently, both in my college papers and then writing about it online on my blog.
Very cool. All right, so let's get into it. So the Civil War is raging across the eastern part of the United States, Middle Tennessee areas, starting to see a fair amount of action. Where in the Civil War does this fall? Because lately, Matt and I have kind of been compartmentalizing the war into summers just so that we could tell various stories, things like that. And that's an easy thing to do, right? Because that's kind of how the war was fought, more or less, was over 4 summers. You do have winter stories, but keep it simple, stupid. That's what I'm focusing on here. So where does it lie in all that?
Oh, so this story really, I mean, you can layer it throughout the war, and there are different stages of this. So if you go back to the beginning of the conflict and go back to 1861, Schuylkill County, just think of it going into the war, is really the industrial heartland of Pennsylvania at the start of the Civil War. Mining that anthracite coal, so you're on the hard coal side of the state.
Okay, wait, real quick. Can you explain the coals to me? Because I led with that. I know nothing. So anthracite?
Anthracite is
hard coal.
Hard coal. Yep.
What do we use that for?
So largely used for much of the time that we are burning a lot of coal, mostly used for home heating.
Okay.
Burns really hot. And really clean, so not a lot of smoke. In the 19th century, in this time period, they're using it to make a lot of iron. There are a lot of anthracite furnaces around eastern Pennsylvania, so also used to fuel, very importantly for the war, the United States Navy. Preferred to use anthracite coal because it burned hotter, so you got more steam, and then also it burned almost smokeless, so that gives you the ability to move around without giving away
your position.
Smoke. Also highly prized by Confederate blockade runners as well. Most of their anthracite came from Wales. There's some anthracite in Wales as well, so they were also using it and prized because you could be a little stealthier using it.
Makes sense.
For our listeners out there, that's Wales the country, not Wales like Shamu.
Yeah.
That's for the people like me out there who legitimately went, wait, Wales? Like, I got it. It took me, like, I hit a speed bump when he said it. I was like, what? Oh. Like, I went, what? Oh. And, like, for everyone that did that, you know me, man. I have to speak to my people.
The Welsh.
I understand it. God.
Yeah. So this area of Pennsylvania is very industrialized. A lot of mines, a lot of wealth coming out of the ground in this part of Pennsylvania. When the war breaks out, another famous part of Schuylkill County history is the so-called First Defenders. So this is a unit that ends up becoming the 48th Pennsylvania, a large portion of it. They are some of the first soldiers to volunteer after Fort Sumter. They go and they race to Washington. They get attacked in Baltimore a day before the 6th Massachusetts gets...
Well, then why do they get all the love?
The First Defenders are the first group of soldiers from outside of Washington, D.C.
Yep, to get to the capital.
No, but like, why do we focus on Massachusetts
because
getting beat
they get
up in Baltimore?
into a straight up firefight.
Well, yeah, I mean, I understand what that is.
Yeah.
I guess I asked this question without knowing anything about what their experience is like the day. You said the day before?
Yeah, so they come through Baltimore on April 18th, so day before the
So it's
6th
their
Massachusetts.
fault that everybody's keyed up the next day on the 19th.
I mean, you could even get into one of the members of the First Defenders is a black man named Nicholas Biddle, who's considered to be one of the first casualties of the American Civil War. He's struck in the head by one of the bricks pulled out of the street by the mob in Baltimore, and it strikes him in the head, leaves him with a huge gash.
No good. No good.
They trundle them off to the capital with the rest of the militia unit. And I would say I can't tell the story as eloquently as John Hoptack, who is kind of the I would say official, really like Civil War unit historian of Schuylkill County.
Sure.
But Nicholas Biddle is considered to be one of the first casualties of the.
All right, we need you to pull some strings then and get a hot tack down here.
We can get John.
All right. Oh, I love the
you gotta get
confidence of
him
that.
talking about 48th Pennsylvania because he is just
Like, honestly, after Matt booked Scott Hartwig, I believe anything he tells me.
Oh,
If you say you can get hot tag, I believe you, buddy.
Yep.
I believe you.
Yeah,
My man.
So very patriotic. Schuylkill County is the beginning of the war. They send off several units. 48th Pennsylvania goes off in the end of the summer of 1861. The 96th Pennsylvania goes off. That's a unit that I have a lot of interest in. But who's left at home? By and large, a lot of the Irish immigrant laboring class who are generally antagonistic about the war and what it's all about, and tend to be very politically opposed to the Lincoln administration. They stay at home. They continue working in the mines. Coal values go through the roof because everyone wants it to make the iron for the furnaces. The U.S. Navy is buying up
it's a war
massive
resource.
quantities.
Yeah.
So the price goes through the roof. And so these laborers are looking around and they're like, wait, our wages suck. Our life is generally miserable in these little, what are called patch towns, these little company towns where these mines are located. And so they begin to organize. And they're beginning, this is kind of a early forerunner to some of the labor unions that you're going to see develop in Schuylkill County in the years after the Civil War. But they're beginning to get together, realize that collectively, the laboring class has this opportunity because of the high wages and because of the high demand, I should say, to ask for more money and wages, for better working conditions, better living conditions, and their best bet is to do things like go on strike, withholding their work, stopping the operation of these mines because it's an invaluable resource for the war effort. And so you start to see that in the second year of the war, the second spring, 1862. You start to see strikes. You start to see, work stoppages, and you're starting to see efforts on behalf of these laborers. And I distinctly make that different than miners, because miners are actually kind of considered to be like above these people. The laborers are like
the miner is the skill.
Yes, they're the skilled workers, which and then you have the laborers who are they're the muscle. They're the ones doing all the grunt work,
pushing the carts,
shoveling, doing a lot of the drudgery work.
Yeah.
And they realize they have a lot of leverage, and they start to use that leverage in the second year of the conflict. And
now, when you say the spring, is this like on the Richmond time? Is this like McClellan's moving on the peninsula, or is this later?
So this is like, I would say it lines up with the Peninsula Campaign. So April and May of 1862 is when you start to see this really start to pop up.
Lines up nicely.
Yep. Yeah. And then going into the summer of 1862 is the politics of the war are really getting muddy on the northern home front. Then you start to see these workers beginning to become more, you could say, radicalized. It's becoming explicitly anti-war in some cases, and you're starting to see some of these lines being drawn, and you're starting to see the conflict, the Civil War, kind of come home. And you start to see some of the partisan lines being drawn between Republicans who are generally pro-war, pro-Lincoln administration, and these mine workers who are Democrats who are by and large anti-war. And that is going to blow up when Pennsylvania, amongst all of the other Union states, begins to think about having drafts. And beginning to think about drafting militiamen into their state units.
Why are they anti-war? Like, can I just ask that real quick? Like, if they're working in an industry where their resource is essentially gold right now, and they are realizing that they hold this weight, like, why? Like, I'd be pro-war, and I would use that leverage to band together and get better wages. Like, why are they anti-war?
They are anti-war because they view, even before many pro-war soldiers who are out fighting for the Union, they're beginning to see this conflict as a war to end slavery, which is for them a war to undercut their labor, to undercut them by bringing in formerly enslaved people from the South, bring them into work industries in the North, and cut out the Irish altogether.
Is this where a lot of that cheap crutch a lot of Irish people today in this country lean on, where they try to validate the Irish experience in society, and we're one step from the bottom, and all. Is there a lot of this conversation involved right now?
Exactly.
Okay.
This is what this is. This is a fight for the bottom. Okay. They are perceiving this region sees a lot of anti-Irish sentiment on behalf of the middle and upper class people. A lot of very anti-Catholic, nativist, and so there is a lot of anger and frustration about that, and now they see themselves as having this opportunity with this higher cost of this good that they are producing.
Right.
Their fear is that, with the war being a war potentially to, especially as you're leading towards the Emancipation Proclamation and some of the confiscation acts in the summer of 1862, you're beginning to see these Irish laborers recognizing that, we could be cut out of this story. We could be cut out of this, and so they are perceiving that this is a threat. That the war is actively a threat to them.
I really like that you brought up this point, Jake, because we've got a couple of things happening here. First off, it was fascinating. I didn't realize there was a difference in the structure of a mine, that miners are above laborers. Now, are they going to team up with some of these strikes and work stoppages? Are they going to get some of the more skilled labor of the miners to back them, or is it strictly the laboring?
It's mostly the laboring class.
Okay.
Mostly the kind of bottom rung people who are going to be doing a lot of this, but because essentially the way that this worked is a lot of times the miners are hiring these laborers, so there's like almost it's
so they can concentrate on digging and not having to.
Correct. Okay. And oftentimes there's a fascinating book about this time period, and it looks at one town in Schuylkill County. It's called St. Clair, which is the community. It's by Anthony F.C. Wallace, I believe, and it's written a few decades ago, but it's still a great study of like how these dynamics worked, and it's like much more complicated and complex than I think that we kind of realize, living 160 years later.
Yep.
Just the level that there's a company system where it's like company towns, but then there's like these intricate labor details, but going on between like the different classes within the structure of these mining companies. But by and large, these kind of revolts are going to be among the kind of bottom rung of workers, laborers in these mining villages and communities. And they're also quite isolated. Schuylkill County, even today, and parts of eastern Pennsylvania and the hills and valleys, it is quite isolated, even now. Roads aren't great. You're in this kind of this area of Pennsylvania that was once known as St. Anthony's Wilderness. It is these hollows, valleys, narrow draws. It is quite isolated, and so these folks are living out there. And
is this anywhere near Centralia?
Yeah, so Centralia is kind of being established in this time period. A lot of the high price of coal is going to mean that there's going to be a lot of investment in the region. So the Civil War is really responsible for building a lot of parts of Schuylkill County, a lot of parts of the coal region, what's known as the coal region of Pennsylvania, because northern industrialists are dumping a whole lot of cash because they see it as an opportunity, a great investment. It's a terrible investment. Most of these people lose their shirts as a result of this, but because of the drop in the price once the war is over. But
right.
It is not. There's there's a lot of uncertainty in this industry. And even with all of this money pouring in, there's still a lot of uncertainty. I think Wallace in St. Clair refers to 60% of these collieries, as they're known as, mining operations, shut down within their first year. It is an industry that is, on the surface, it looks like, oh, easy money. The coal's in the ground. Look at this high price. But they don't have a lot of, while they have a lot of scientific advancement, they understand geology pretty well. They're guessing a lot of the times too. So it's like,
so they're missing when they dig, or they can't get it out.
They're missing when they're especially in Schuylkill County. You think of like coal mining in like West Virginia.
West Virginia. Sorry, just got it. It's a reflex at this point. I work on the border of the damn state. I meet West Virginians every day. They're obsessed with the song. The song was written about Maryland. They don't want to accept this fact. We'll another day. But I reflex. You say the state name.
We'll let you have that rant another day.
You say the damn name, and I sing the stupid song. It just happens.
So that coal in West Virginia.
West Virginia. So, well, we'll stay away from it.
Lies flat. Those basins of coal are flat, and so you can just kind of go from one end and just follow it through the mountain. Schuylkill County, it's actually, they lie anywhere between 40 and 60% pitch, so they're almost vertical, which means that it is really complicated, and there's a lot of rock faults, as they're called. There's areas where rock has fallen, broken up the coal in different. So it makes it a lot more difficult
to get it out of the ground.
Yes, and also a lot more dangerous in some ways.
Sounds like it.
Well, because you're going down instead of going down and over. Eventually, it sounds like in West Virginia, you hit down and then you go over.
Yeah.
It sounds like here in Pennsylvania, you keep going towards hell. You got to keep going
down. Yeah. So by the second year go back to kind of the Civil War time frame here. By the second year of the war, as we get into the late summer of 1862, with the talk about conscription, talk about drafts, a lot of people are very stirred up. And really, the point at which things start to become violent is really in the autumn of 1862. Specifically, you can tie it to the Battle of Antietam, and you can tie it to the Emancipation Proclamation.
So we know a thing or two about Antietam here on the show, Matt.
We do. And let me cut in for just a moment, because I think the point that Jake's making is really, really important. And a lot of our listeners may be asking, wait a minute, now what? The draft doesn't start until 63, and that's absolutely right, but there was a real threat of a draft in 62. The War Department in the spring of 62, in its infinite wisdom, stops recruiting. They think they have enough troops to get this thing in the bag. Things are looking fairly good with the Peninsula campaign.
I mean, yeah, they're sitting right outside of Richmond.
Right.
I mean, they think this thing's winding down.
Exactly. They shut down recruiting. And that turns out to be a huge mistake that is going to plague the federal armies, particularly the Army of the Potomac, for the rest of the war. And so there is a very real danger of a draft in 62, to the point where Lincoln will basically go to the governors of, say, Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, the big three, and say, you know what? Nobody wants a draft. But if you guys decide to have a recruiting campaign, that could really deal with a lot of this problem. And that's where we get things like "We're coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more." That's from that operation, to get more troops without having a draft.
So how much is the concern about a potential draft a legitimate concern, or is it political rhetoric? It's a midterm year. And, that's a part of the story, right? Is the politics of 1862.
That's a good point, Pat.
So, how much is it a reality? We live in a time right now where there's a bunch of people screaming on television, and then there's reality. So we don't have a television involved at this time, but it's not a debatable fact. The Union war effort thinks this war is over, so they have definitely sort of hamstrung themselves recruiting. But the urgency, are they really desperate for enlistments? To the point where these pieces of rhetoric have some weight? I mean, I know they do because they come in the next year, but is it...
Well, look how many
How real is it right now
Look how many
talk?
9-month regiments are raised in August of 62.
Right.
That's your answer right there.
You're right, okay.
So they are...
What's our favorite 9-month regiment raised in August?
132nd PA.
No, that one that was raised last summer in
Jesus.
Maine.
That's not a 9-month regiment.
Oh, you're right. See, this shows you what I know, but it just gives an opportunity to get Matt off the rails. All right, so lot of concern that this potential draft conscription is coming. I always would find it interesting that they would go after these types of towns that are supporting the actual war effort. I mean, coal is everything right now, so it's weird that. I mean, are they targets of a potential draft? Like, are those the same laborers that are in this dispute? Are they the same people that are going to be drafted?
Yes. And in fact, Schuylkill County has kind of a Republican political boss who is the editor of the newspaper in Pottsville. It's called the Miners Journal. This guy by the name of Benjamin Bannon.
ER.
ER, yes. Not like the show.
Yeah.
And so Benjamin Bannon is actually he's an Irishman, but he's a Protestant Irishman, and he becomes very anti-Catholic, very nativist before the Civil War, and it has a very, very dim view of Irish Catholics specifically. He is actually going to be his newspaper is going to be the one that is going to coin the term Molly Maguires for a lot of these Irish workers in these rural towns in Schuylkill County. Molly Maguires has a connection going back to Ireland itself and a lot of anti-British, anti-English violence that occurred in Ireland in the decades before this time period. But Benjamin Bannon sees the draft and conscription. Pennsylvania at this point is talking about doing a state draft and doing drafted militia, so bringing men in. So they're already having this conversation at the state level is farther along than it is at the federal level.
Well, yeah, because we heard last season from Eric Money, who gave us like almost 5 hours on the Pennsylvania reserves, and we talk explicitly about the fact that Pennsylvania is trying to handle its own business, so its own drafts, whatever. Like Pennsylvania is just trying to be involved in itself in the war.
Yes.
So that's kind of on brand for that episode. So.
Yeah. And so what Benjamin Bannon is thinking about doing is like, we can use the weapon of conscription to break up these early forming kind of unions of these laboring workers in these predominantly Irish districts. And so he's thinking about using conscription as a tool, a political tool as well, because what was going on because of all of these men who've gone off and joined the U.S. Army, and this is where it comes back to your election year, is that who's left behind?
Right.
All of the Democratic voters in these districts. And what happens is like they elect a Democratic representative to Congress. They vote Democratic representatives to the state house. They're voting for anti-war politicians. And so Bannon is there. And this is like one of those, Schuylkill County is like it is a county that is like right on the line in terms of like what do we call it, like a purple district?
A purple district.
Yeah.
Like
it is. There is.
We don't say swing anymore. We say purple district.
Purple district.
Purple district.
Like Barney.
Yeah, I was gonna say the only things purple in my life are purple drink and purple dinosaurs. And I guess purple drink never went anywhere, but I guess the dinosaurs making a comeback. So who knows?
Yeah. So Bannon is looking at this as a tool to get these guys out, which is benefiting him in two ways. One, politically, because he will get more potential success with his Republican candidates. And then two, it's also allowing for the mine operators to get rid of some of these more unruly characters, as they view them, who are organizing themselves and doing work stoppages and protesting their still low wages, seeking higher pay. And so Bannon is, as this conversation about conscription is going on, he is actively advocating to the Lincoln administration, to Governor Andrew Curtin, saying, hey, we should target these districts for the forced enlistment of some of these Irish mine workers, predominantly Irish mine workers. And so that has created a caustic environment already. Put onto that the Emancipation Proclamation, and suddenly the Lincoln administration's official policy is that they are bringing about the end of slavery.
Right.
And so now not only is there this threat of conscription in which these men fear that they will be thrown into this war to explicitly emancipate the people who they fear are going to come and take their jobs.
Right.
And this
Wait,
is
they took their jobs.
it's exactly
Glad you said it, because I was about to.
And so this is where even in the lead up to what will become kind of one of the larger rebellions, armed revolts among these workers, is this kind of conspiracy theory that this is it's being explicitly done by the Lincoln administration to replace Irish workers.
Oh,
and,
wow.
And so you start to see this in Democratic press. You start to see it not only in Pennsylvania, but throughout the North, that you start to see that this is Democratic politicians at that time are pushing this theory specifically to get out vote, to raise anger about what this war is about, what Lincoln administration is trying to do, which is, emancipate all of the enslaved people of the Confederacy.
Maybe not the origin of replacement theory, but darn near the origin.
I mean, dude,
Yes, it is. It is very, very. It is shockingly. It feels
as
shockingly
you are
relevant.
talking, I am going. This parallels so much of the paranoid insanity that we experience right now. Like, not just the replacement theory, but just the fact that we have politicians going out there knowingly and willfully saying things that are not true because it gins up the voters to do the things. It's like, that's not
Politics.
new. Yeah, like it's not new to this moment of insanity. Here it is 160 years ago in that moment of insanity. We can find this. I work in the 18th century. We love Paul Revere, but Paul Revere was pretty good at making sure, as somebody who had a hand in the print process, that certain things got printed and certain things didn't. So, it's not new. It's actually creepy how simple it is and how often it's reused.
Yeah, and this is where speak a little bit more about kind of modern things. This is where we hear these constant refrain of unprecedented. It's
Yeah.
It's
Really?
not.
It's not unprecedented.
It's oftentimes you'll find these parallels in our nation's history. These moments of conspiracy theories. These moments of racial tension. And this you're going to find it in the Civil War time period, because this is that time period of where we see those tensions at their highest moment, because Americans are actively killing each other.
And what's silly to me, and we'll move on from this, but just to point it out, is like there are people involved in this Civil War story who were a part of the last time things were bonkers, so they should have some context. Like, we have people right now in this country that lived through McCarthyism and yet are behaving like insane people. And it's like, wait, did you not remember the last time we did this as a nation where we kind of got a little loopy? Like, it's just funny that it's, that sounds like, oh, we're dealing with that, but, that's an us thing. It's not, because in the Civil War era, there are people that experienced the, what am I thinking of? The 1830s, when things almost went to war. They experienced all that rhetoric. A lot of them were kids during that, and now are saying those things now. It's just funny that, like, there's so much that, like, you just said it super succinctly, and I'll go back to it so I don't try to overphrase it, is things that often appear unprecedented are not. Like, if you, in fact, if you hear the word, research, find out if it really is unprecedented or if they're just trying to tell you something wild on the news. Yeah. So
I was thinking, before you fleshed that out, Jake, that it was fascinating that we have this fairly rural, fairly isolated part of Pennsylvania that seems to really be on the nose with how the war is beginning to swing when it comes to emancipation and things like that. And the Lincoln administration has been working in very succinct steps throughout the summer of 62, right up to the point where the preliminary emancipation is announced in September of 62. But I was fascinated that they would kind of be catching on to this in being such an isolated part of the state. But it sounds like they were actively being goaded by it by politicians and the press and things of that nature.
Are these these the smartest Irish people in the world? That's what we're really asking at this point.
They can see the future.
I mean, literally, these guys are. I mean, literally, all the other Irish are a bunch of mix, that are being. That's what we are at this time. But that's but these guys have their pulse finger on whatever the pulse is.
Yeah, I mean,
wherever you can find it.
They're also reading what or maybe not reading, as a lot of these people did not have the ability to read.
That's what I'm saying. Like I was making a joke.
They're picking up secondhand what people like Bannon are saying. And Benjamin Bannon is out there on the edge of Republican politics, where he is saying, he is not he was not an abolitionist before the Civil War. Mm-hmm. He is anti-slavery and the anti-growth of slavery to the West kind of Republican. He is actively in the summer of 1862 advocating for an emancipation before Lincoln officially publicly is in favor of it. And so they're picking up on this. They see that the Bannons of the world are the ones who are increasingly having the political power in Lincoln's government and in northern
we don't like
politics.
when Bannons have power in politics.
So Bannon with an A.
No.
Good. Since we're on theme.
Good clarification. Good clarification.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
So they're getting nervous.
Yes. And this all boils over in October of 1862, around the time of midterm elections. And in late October, a movement kind of begins in the mining district in an area known as Cass Township, which is just northwest of Pottsville and of Minersville, two of the larger communities in Schuylkill County. This is a very isolated area. It's part of what's known as kind of the west end of Schuylkill County. There's a great book about this area, this region, written by Mark Bullock, who it's called Sons of Molly McGuire. Highly advise reading it. It's about that community specifically. But Cass Township, mine workers there begin to rise up, and not only by rising up, gathering together, but also arming themselves. And they are going to begin marching from colliery to colliery, from town to town, mine to mine, shutting down work, gathering more troops to this movement, and they are going to begin really talking about how can they actively stop this war effort.
So they're not recruiting at the taverns at night. They might be doing it, but you just said they're actively shutting down job sites.
Yes, correct.
That's a huge deal.
Correct.
Is there any opposition to that in the moment? Like, as we have discussed at times on this show, like nothing is ever unanimous across the board. I imagine there are Irish laborers who are not with actually doing it. They might be with you in spirit, but not interested in really doing anything directly about it. I also imagine there are loyalists to use a word that I'm familiar with, and I got to imagine that because it's an industry that runs a town, that there's sort of like, I'm going to use the word henchmen, please forgive me everyone, but there's like, important work and boss people and like, enforcer people that do that type of stuff. Like, is there any pushback to this in the immediacy as it's happening?
There's no mechanism for it. So all of these fighting age men, if you will, are off in the U.S. Army.
Right.
The Benjamin Bannon is complaining in the Miners Journal that the Schuylkill County sheriff is not doing anything, in part because he's a Democrat and also is being perceived as being for the kind of uprising that's going on.
Right.
He tries to pull together a posse. They are quickly struck with stones, and a mob of people, including the Irish women of Cass Township, forcibly force this posse from the sheriff
on brand
out of these towns, and there is no military force in this region at this point.
So it's just happening.
It's happening, right. And they're moving from town to town. Across northern and western Schuylkill County. This kind of comes to a head when a group of about estimated at 500 men descends on this little village called Tremont, which is in western Schuylkill County. It's on the main rail line to Harrisburg, and they actually stop a train full of recruits that is going to Harrisburg to join the U.S. Army and tells them to get off and go home. And And
no pushback in that moment from young fighting age men.
At this moment, this is where Governor Andrew Curtin becomes extremely concerned and begins flashing off cables to Edwin Stanton in Washington, saying it appears that there is an active revolt going on among the mine workers of Schuylkill County, and that I need federal troops. He calls for 1,000 regulars is what he wants.
He doesn't even want the volunteer boys. He wants you to send the real guys.
Yep, he wants the regulars. Edwin Stanton, at this point, this is like October 22nd, 23rd, 24th. At this point,
he's like, I got McClellan to deal with right now. Can you not?
Precisely.
Well, the Loudoun Valley campaign's about to kick off in 3 days.
Wait, you mean the part where McClellan actually chases Lee? You know, that thing that we've been harping on for 5 years? Like, all right, Jake, we won't do it, but Matt and I started an exercise at the beginning of this show 5 years ago where we wanted to deliver criticisms and credits alongside each other where they're due, because, you know, certain people get all the praise and never the criticism and the other way, blah, blah, blah. So with McClellan, we're like, we heap a ton of crap on that guy. What can we look at that's right? And one thing we come to is that he does chase Lee. Like, why do we act like this doesn't happen? And that plan starts to work. So since Matt did a ton of really good research and writing on that subject, I'm very loyal to my friend. So whenever it comes up, I'm like, he chased him. Get it out of your minds, even if it's irrelevant to our story. So there we go. Irrelevant to this story, but Little Mac chases Lee. Get off it.
It is. I would say it is relevant in that Edwin Stanton has no troops to give.
Right.
He's chasing Lee.
Right. He has no. McClellan has asked for all the troops. Always.
Shocker.
I mean,
there's a
wrong.
criticism we can level. Yeah. Shocker.
And so this starts this kind of communication back and forth between Stanton and Curtin, and ultimately they are going to send in some troops, some cavalry troops. A battery of artillery is going to come in to Pottsville, and this is going to start a permanent military garrison in Schuylkill County in Pottsville for the remainder of the war.
So they're taking artillery and placing it in positions that look down upon mines and common grounds around minefields? Not minefields, mine shafts? Sorry.
So what the fear is that this group is going to descend on Pottsville and the county seat and like take over. It's kind of it's a very ginned up fear that is not real, but it is the fear that this group will descend from the mountains and come in and impose its will as a mob.
I was wondering more in the relationship to like Baltimore and Federal Hill, right? They riot, and then essentially Baltimore wakes up to Governor K. Warren's men on top of the hill with a bunch of cannons and a F around and find out kind of mentality.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's similar, like, you know, school, these various towns are going to go to sleep and kind of wake up, and suddenly there's artillery presence and infantry and I guess the boogeyman on the mountain. But
yeah, it's ultimately what they want. They want to show a force.
They want
to show a force. Ultimately, what stops this particular rebellion is actually a figure from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia is going to be brought in, and he is going to go around to different parishes in Western Schuylkill County. His name's Bishop James Wood, and he is going to speak to these Catholic communities, and he's going to say, basically, get yourselves in line. This isn't what God is for, and they are going to put down their weapons.
Interesting,
but for a time, and as a mass unit, they put down their weapons. What this is going to begin is for the remainder of the Civil War and into the post-war period. There's going to be an increase in the number of attacks on mine management, on colliery management, and in individual communities. You're going to start to see attacks on people that are perceived as being pro-war. You're going to see attacks on people who are considered to be kind of anti-mine worker, a lot of company officials, mine superintendents. One of the more famous versions that Mark Bullock talks about in his book actually occurs on December 13th, 1862. So as U.S. troops are assaulting up Marie's Heights, an armed mob of mine workers is attacking the mine superintendent's house in a little town called Phoenix Park. just northwest of Pottsville, and marching on the superintendent's house, the mine, the company store, and basically saying, like, we're going to shut down this mine. If you go back to work, we'll kill you.
Wow.
And if you force us to go back to work, we'll kill you. And this is going to begin a theme that will continue on through Schuylkill County's history for the next decade. This kind of mass violence gatherings, uprisings of these mine workers who are opposed to various things, whether it be working conditions, they want higher pay, they're anti-war, they're anti-conscription, and you're going to start to see what is going to be classified under Benjamin Bannon's Miners Journal as Molly Maguire violence.
Is Molly Maguire, I know you said it goes back, but it's a catch-all term? Is it a derisive term originally? Like it's used?
Sounds like it.
Like because, I called Mick and I called us all Micks because my last name is McGuire, not spelled the same, but, Matt like cringed when I said that. But like this, there is, there is, just to validate a bunch of people for a half of a moment, there is a ton of anti-Irish sentiment and throwing around generic last names like Maguire in a general sense. I wondered, was that an intention of being derisive? Call them all the one thing.
So just like in Bullock's, the name of his book is The Sons of Molly Maguire. So what he does is he traces this kind of violence and this kind of community action that people are gathering together and taking action together back to Ireland itself. And what would happen is that on some holidays and in times of kind of rebellions, men would put on kind of whiteface. They would dress almost as ghosts, and they would dress as women, dress up in dresses, and they would attack kind of people in their communities who they viewed as supporters of the English or supporters of the kind of landowning class in Ireland. And so what Bannon is doing by bringing that to the United States is he's bringing this, the threat of this kind of violence that had been known in Ireland before, and saying that they're doing the exact same thing. And so it is kind of tied to this idea of kind of Irish revolutionary activity that is being now exacted upon not the landowning class in Ireland, but on the mine-owning class of Schuylkill County and of the anthracite region of Pennsylvania.
Interesting. Now, is this going to? So this is very serious rebellions or resistance in late '62. Are we going to see this? You said it continues through the Civil War and even beyond. What's going to happen? And if I'm jumping too far ahead, please do let me know. But what's going to happen in '63 when the actual conscription acts pass?
Yes. So this is where there is going to be specifically targeted violence. And there is a particular kind of person who is going to be threatened, and that is the enrolling agents who are being brought in. That makes sense. They become targets of this violence. Certain communities they can't even gain access to. They are stoned before they ever get there.
Wow.
Their arrival is going to be kind of heralded by kind of people watching the roads, knowing who the enrolling agents are. There's one gentleman, a mine superintendent in Audenried, which is in eastern Schuylkill County, Carbon County, near Hazleton, Pennsylvania, who is murdered in his home by a mob of between 20 and 30 people that come in. They shoot him in the head and kill him. The crime that he commits, according to these attackers, is that he turned over his entire payroll to the enrolling agent. And so they murdered him for it. Right. And this kind of violence is being exacted across the region. The Schuylkill County in this time period becomes known as being particularly lawless.
Sounds like it.
And so in an effort to restore, as the federal government and the state government believes, law and order to this region, they are going to bring in members of the Invalid Corps, and this is going to become permanent.
DRC.
Yep,
Yes.
the Veteran Reserve Corps.
Yeah,
Nice.
they are going to be brought in as permanent garrison to Pottsville, to Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, parts of these kind of centrally located towns and communities, and they're going to be kind of almost like a quick reaction force that in areas where there is violence against enrolling agents, actions being taken against the draft, these units will be summoned and will be called in to quell that violence, or quell the threat of that violence, to threaten.
That's fascinating. I had no idea the Invalid Corps, or later the Veteran Reserve Corps, was utilized in such a manner.
Yes, and these are not large numbers of men. This is oftentimes you'll see garrisons of 50 or 100.
I was going to say, got to be companies. We got to be talking companies.
Yep.
You don't have that many people in this corps to begin with. Like, when you hear it, I mean, it sounds like you think that they're going to rely upon thousands, but they're not all able-bodied. Some are missing limbs, digits, things like that. So when you get down to you're actually, like, mobile, able to do the campaign thing, move out into country, like companies. I would say companies at most.
Yeah. These are small units meant to come in with, massed, trained men, massed rifles, maybe a cannon, and that is meant to put down whatever revolt, whatever violence is being brought about by these mine workers. What that is increasingly going to be is that anytime there is any kind of a strike or a work stoppage, that is being perceived as a political stance, as anti-war, because they're trying to stop this flow of fuel to the Union war effort. And this is going to become, as the war heads towards its conclusion and ultimately the end of the conflict, this is going to see the continued militarization of this region, and this is going to lead to, in the years after the war, the rise of what's known as the coal and iron police. And that is going to be these companies actually forming their own police forces that are going to serve the role of what the Invalid Corps, the VRC, did during the Civil War, and continuing that. What becomes actually part of the state police in Pennsylvania is actually made up of these kind of coal and iron police, these private police forces.
That all kind of fraternalized together and whatever. Is this where Alan Pinkerton gets involved in the Molly Maguire story?
He's going to roll in in the 1870s, and there is kind of a fascinating labor history story that comes into play. So as all of this is going on, there's a gentleman that arrives from Ireland in Pennsylvania named John Siney. Settles in St. Clair, Pennsylvania in 1863, right around the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, goes to work in the mines. He is disillusioned by the way that workers are treated. And in the aftermath of the war, he and a group of Schuylkill County mine workers are going to form one of the first successful labor unions in the United States. This is known as the Working Men's Benevolent Association, the WBA.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And they start in Schuylkill County, and John Siney is kind of their leader. They start just a year or two after the Civil War with mixed success, but what is going to put them on the map, not only around northeastern Pennsylvania, but across the Keystone State and across the kind of industrial belt of Pennsylvania out through Ohio, and through the United States, is going to be the Avondale disaster in northeastern Pennsylvania, just southwest of Wilkes-Barre. Over 100 men and boys are killed when the mine complex above ground caught fire, and there was only one way out, and it was on fire, and so they all suffocated. And what Siney did was he went to Avondale, went to this disaster site, spoke to the survivors, spoke to the families, and said, this is why you need the labor union. This is why we need to organize, because we need to change.
It's not just wages, it's safety.
It's safety.
Sure,
it's increasingly becoming safety.
Yeah.
And so this is going to force through this accident. The organization of the WBA is going to force through some of the first mine safety laws in the United States in Pennsylvania.
That's what it takes. I mean, we did this on the show with Titanic. It's that huge correct. It helps solace, safety of life at sea. I mean, that basically comes to life directly as a result of the Titanic sinking. So here we are, another major tragedy, piece of safety legislation in the aftermath.
Yeah. So WBA is going to become successful. They're going to be organizing themselves. Mine workers across northeastern Pennsylvania are gathering under this banner. The mine owners and railroad companies perceive this as a threat. They begin to organize themselves into kind of an anthracite collective. These owners are going to be guided kind of under the ownership or under the leadership of the president of the Reading Railroad. He is going to actively work to crush the union. The WBA is going to launch a strike around the region in the 1870s. That strike is broken by the railroad companies and by the anthracite companies. And increasingly as a result of that, and of course there's also this, there is the depression that is going on in the 1870s. The price of coal is way down. Right. And so when the union is crushed, the WBA ceases to exist in any kind of structural, forceful way, a lot of disillusioned workers begin turning to the same violence that they were using during the Civil War time period. And so you see beatings, you see murders, you see reprisals for those beatings and murders, back and forth and back and forth. Again, lawless Schuylkill County. And
I said, dust off the old playbook.
Pretty much. And so this leads to the Pinkertons being brought in by the railroad companies. And so Alan Pinkerton, his detectives, particularly a guy by the last name of McParland, is going to be brought in, and they're going to infiltrate what they perceive as this secret organization that they call the Molly Maguires.
Is that the Sean Connery movie?
Yes.
That's the whole...
Yes.
Okay. So, this sounds familiar to me.
It's going to lead to mass hangings, trials, and what a lot of scholarship points out to this day is, and this kind of gets to what we were talking about earlier with this kind of paranoia about and conspiracy theories. So really the Molly Maguires as an organized, and you'll see this as a secret society or as a terrorist organization. No such thing existed. There was no collective, organized organization.
I mean, it never does.
No. Right. And it's like it
doesn't exist now, doesn't exist then.
Correct.
It never does.
Correct. And so this was just a helpful rhetorical tool to be used by the powers of capital and money to basically squelch organized labor.
Sure.
By threatening them with, you see what we can do. We can, put you on trial for murders you may have never committed, and execute you as being organizers of the secret society that never really existed. And that's not to say that violence was not rampant in this region. It was.
And it's so funny in a non-ha-ha way that this is something that involves tons of Irish immigrants, considering they just left situations where they could be put on trial, executed in prison for literally nothing, because that's what the British were able to do up into the next century. It's wild that they have this type of intimate familiarity with just having a system tilted against you, and yet engage in it. Question I had for you. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for your Fredericksburg reference earlier, because Matt and I love to point out when your eyes are focused elsewhere, there's story happening in another place. Like, we did that with Raina on season 1 with the Allegheny Arsenal explosion. We're talking about Antietam on September 17th, except for that thing goes up essentially at the same time that the Bloody Lane is becoming the Bloody Lane. Right. So also I wanted to say to you, I think since we are the new, or we're slowly becoming the tip of the spear, as all of our role models, idols, mentors are all retiring and passing on, unfortunately, since it's us that is inheriting the mantle now, I prefer to think of December 17th, you went right to Marie's Heights. See, I like to focus on the part where 13th. Meade smashes through Jackson's lines, and is like breaking Stonewall Jackson's lines. I don't like to focus on the death at the wall. What about the fact that Jackson's line was broken? We never talk about that. So, maybe we could do that from time to time.
We've talked about it.
We talk about that all the time. Question, though, going back to the war years, when the war is being fought in faraway places, having troops VRC troops, regular troops, doesn't matter. Having them in Schuylkill County, which I want to pat my own back. I knew how to pronounce Schuylkill before any of this was ever a part of my life. I dated a girl from Quakertown, so I learned how to say all this stuff the right way.
Well done.
Thank you. But, it's when it's 61 and 62, I guess we'll start there because that's when things really start to kick off in coal country. But in 62, the war's on the peninsula. In 64, it's in Maryland, and it's on the peninsula. It's around Virginia. In 65, the damn thing's wrapping up. But in 63, the war comes into the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, it is in the backyard of this stuff. So does the environment change when suddenly everything is in your backyard? So on the Gettysburg campaign, does that affect this story differently than, say, Antietam does, where it kind of galvanizes this thing into existence? Monocacy campaign early. I call it the Monocacy campaign. I know it's not, but that's just what I call it. I got a lot of love. But it's in your backyard. So does the summer of 63, does the Gettysburg campaign affect this in a way that the other years of the war don't?
No, not particularly. It is surprisingly things are kind of surprisingly quiet for this time period where, especially so think of the aftermath of Gettysburg as the New York draft riots.
Right.
Arguably not arguably, in fact, the deadliest urban violence that this country's ever seen.
Yes.
And all related to the draft, the same issue that all of these mine workers have been protesting for over a year at this point.
All kind of perpetrated by large amounts of Irish immigrants.
Yeah. So they're Schuylkill County, areas of northeastern Pennsylvania at this point have troops there, and so it's keeping things quiet.
So we're behaving.
Yeah, and you start to see some resistance to this. There's a general whose name is escaping me at the moment who briefly takes command of the kind of garrisons around northeastern Pennsylvania, which is in the Department of the Susquehanna. And he comes in and visits Pottsville in August of 1863, and he and his little coterie of staff officers ride out of town, and someone takes a shot at him. And there's, he views this as an assassination attempt, and there is these little bits and pieces of there's no large scale kind of collective form of violence in the way there was in 1862, but you're seeing these kind of clandestine, more like an insurrection or not insurgency kind of tactics being utilized, and you're seeing those attacks by night with 20 to 30 people attacking the mine superintendent's house. This is the kind of violence that is going to be utilized.
It's terrorism, and it's not warfare. It's terrorism. It sounds more like
it's I mean, you could call it terrorism. I think that they would have called it guerrilla warfare.
It sounds like terrorism.
Asymmetric warfare is the way that they're viewing it.
All right, so just to kind of wrap this question I had back up. So how far? I mean, I'm not a Pennsylvanian, and I don't know the region super well. How far separates this region from Gettysburg? I mean, not far.
Yeah, it's so as far as Confederate troops get, which is the outskirts of Harrisburg, actually the closest part of the mining region to where Confederates get to is actually where I grew up, Pennsylvania, and they actually shut down the mines, and everyone went off and joined the militia, emergency militia.
So that's what I was wondering. Is so when the huge Confederate force is sitting in the backyard of this story, or the front yard, because going to a conversation we had off mic before this recording started, apparently people in my life are so nuanced that they will debate front yard, backyard with me about a story that happens within 5 minutes of my house. So, who knows what we're talking here, but I was saying with the Confederate Army, and this is, I believe, is this the biggest the Confederate Army is at this point, or will be at Gettysburg? No.
It's not the biggest the Army of Northern Virginia ever got. That was actually during the 7 days when they have approximately 90,000 troops in the field.
Maybe, is this biggest amount of fighting men, maybe? There's some distinction that I feel like their army, irrelevant. Huge force. What's that?
Your mic.
My mic went away. Yeah. Look at that. It happens from time to time, guys. Like we said, we are an amateur show. Professionally produced, but amateur guys doing it. So who knows? All right, so Confederate Army's in the backyard. My question was, is there an intention? So it sounds like these guys run off and join emergency militias.
Yep.
Second question to kind of end it is, they're anti the war. They're anti the abolition of slavery. Are they anti-Confederate?
So it is. It depends. It's complicated. It always is. There are groups, and it's so hard to tell the stories of these mine workers because they don't leave us
Their personal stories.
their personal stories. Very rarely do you find that.
But what I'm asking is, when the Confederacy is this close, can we time out on all this other bananas because F those guys? Like, do we do that? Do they do that?
It is. You see again, Democrats who are very anti-Lincoln, who do join these emergency militias to turn back Confederates, in part because some of the threats that they perceive are to their livelihood. That these, there's a report in I believe it's the Richmond Inquirer, I forget which paper in Richmond, that ends up turning over into getting to Union lines, and it says that part of Lee's plan in Pennsylvania is to go and burn up all of the mines in Pennsylvania so that this supply of fuel could be, moved.
Oh yeah, so
stop that access.
So that doesn't mean politics.
I've had this debated with me of whether or not that's actually Lee's plan. It's kind of irrelevant because
that's what they believe.
The threat.
Yeah. It does, it's in the paper.
Right. Yeah. And so it's like that's what that's what they're perceiving. So they are men who would never sign up for a 3 years regiment or a 9 months regiment. Will sign up for emergency service.
Yeah, because this could be viewed as this is a Pennsylvania problem, or more locally, like this is a my town, my mine, my income problem.
Yeah, exactly. My livelihood
I
problem.
mean, we do this all the time. Like, I tell people, I make no bones about it. I don't know that I would go and fight in a foreign war for this country. I love being an American, but I don't know that I'd want to go die somewhere on foreign soil. I might not even fight if a landed army lands in New York, and I root for New York sports teams. But by God, if you invade
the Yankees.
Yeah, I know. If you invade the old line state, you're dead, and I'm going to sprinkle Old Bay on your corpse if you invade this state. But that's what I mean.
At least you gave the whole state your support as opposed to just like Union Bridge.
No, there are parts of this state that I don't really. It's like the First Amendment, right? Like, there are people that abuse it, but I'll support their right to have it. Like, there are parts of this state that I'm like, on. But, you know what? Crab cakes and football, I got your back. But no, that's what I'm saying is like I'm joking for our listeners out there, but there's a serious version of that sentiment where like they could give two shits about this war happening in Virginia. Right. They could barely even care about it being in Adams County. However, you read or hear in the papers that Lee might be bringing this war not to your doorstep, but to where you make an income, and that income provides the roof, the food, and all that stuff. And like, that is a very different thing than politics and abolition. Like, that's you're coming at me, bro. So that's kind of what I was asking is, do we have that? That's a more personal reaction than it is a patriotic reaction.
Yeah, I think that, from, again, it's hard so much so because we don't have their perspectives.
Right.
As you kind of interpret it oftentimes through the Republican-leaning newspapers that survive, is that there is a large-scale view that the working class, especially the Irish, want the war to end in a negotiated peace. They want to bring back the Union as it was, if it can survive, with slavery intact. With the status quo of that kind of bottom rung of society kept intact, so that these Irish...
So they're second from the bottom.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And your description of fighting for the bottom earlier, I thought was really apt. Mm-hmm. It's kicking down.
Yes.
Against... Because at least I'm not there.
Correct. Correct. And these are communities that do have, Schuylkill County has a small free black population, not very sizable, mostly those who, like Nicholas Biddle, who had escaped from slavery and had made the decision to settle in this kind of rural area. But there was this fear that amongst these Irish, that that there would be suddenly emancipated slaves would be pouring into the region by the thousands and would provide cheap labor.
Take our jobs.
Exactly. And so that's their fear. That's a fear that is it's a vein that runs through American history.
Oh, absolutely.
We're mining it today, guys.
Yeah. and what is going to, and kind of to bring this through history to today, this is something that has a long history in Pennsylvania, an area with a lot of immigration. So the Irish are going to be kind of replaced on that bottom rung of Coleridgean society when Central Europeans start rolling in. And start coming from Hungary, from the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Did the Irish go up?
Yes.
They go up the ladder.
Yes, they're going up the ladder as new groups are coming in, and then there's more people to punch down on.
Okay.
And that is going to be a theme that runs through Pennsylvania's history, as it runs through American history, right up to the present day, when it's, from Central Europeans to Eastern Europeans to Southern Europeans, from Italians to Latino populations today. It is
from
a
the Central and Southern Americas.
Right.
that runs through the region's history. And I think that's what's so important, is to just go back in time, look at these stories, and realize that this has always been happening, and that this, when you're in the moment and you hear these kind of, especially around partisan politics and talking about immigration and talking about race, that these perspectives that people are thinking they're spewing and they think it's so profound and it's impacting their life, that the same exact thing was being said before, and that it was their ancestor that was the one being punched in the teeth. And I think that is an important perspective to have that empathy, to realize that, oh wait, one time my family was in this exact situation and being talked about and being dealt with in the same way. And I think that is something that is sorely lacking as we as a country are struggling with this kind of idea of understanding civics and also understanding our historical literacy and having literacy about the past. I think in some ways I'm gleeful that we are having these real conversations like we are having right here about race and about ethnicity and immigration in America, that we're talking realistically about our past. But I also am so frustrated that there's not a more honest conversation, and that there's trying to shut down those conversations that are going on. So it's like, this constant push and pull of American politics and of how we talk about our history, how we talk about race, how we talk about ethnicity, is we're still in that kind of tidal push, that ebb and flow. But I just want more people to have these conversations, to realize this past, and to have real honest conversations about it, because I think that those real honest conversations make us more empathetic, make us realize that we've been here before and that we can make things better.
Moving forward, when the army was in the backyard of this story, it seems like people were getting in the defend what is immediately mine, not so much the spirit of the moment, but get out of my house.
Yeah.
All right.
So to kind of wrap things or wind things down here, Jake, I really wanted to say I'm very impressed with not only the information you've brought today and this aspect of the war, because, again, I knew very, very little about this. I'm like, 48th PA, kick some ass. But beyond that, I was not familiar with this one. And this was a really important story, too, folks, because you obviously love your home state. That came off incredibly clear. Yeah. But we're looking at the whole story. There's some grim aspects to this, on racial aspects, on societal aspects, and you told the whole thing in a very, I think, direct manner, and one that is good for our listeners and good for everybody to not only learn this story, but as Pat was suggesting, towards building the conversation for other stories. So excellent work.
Yeah, and I also want to just add on to that, because I think we led this whole show off with, we're going to talk about something that is occurring while you're focused elsewhere in life. The Civil War, any place you go in history, is going to have this sort of circumstance around it, but we just brought you one thing that's happening as a backdrop to this great slaveholders rebellion, the War of the Rebellion, the American Civil War, whatever people in the South pretend to call it now. But, there are a lot of other stories like that. We have told the Allegheny Arsenal, there's this, but there's the whole fact that this is not the only war happening on the North American continent at this time. This is not the only war happening in this country at this time. I mean, Lincoln's got the entire war with the Indians beginning out west. There's an uprising taking place.
Yeah.
I mean, John Pope, right? Disaster at Second Manassas, goes west, actually has a pretty solid military career. We'll get into that in another day. But there's lots and lots happening here. So I love that we got to step away from the battlefields and kind of focus on some of the other realities of wartime. Is people on the home front experience the war differently than the people getting shot at. Do you think that this translates outside of coal to other labors like dock workers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can look at some of these same themes in New York City lead to the draft riots in New York City in the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg. It's the same. It's the same impulses. It's the same politics. It's in some cases the same immigrant groups that are carrying this out. There's a great book I'm working my way through right now, which tells the story of the Democratic Party during the war and the complexities within the Democratic Party between pro-war and anti-war wings. And what is fascinating is just how different the perspectives were in individual communities. I advise people get into the weeds, learn the complexities, learn the details, seek out new information, because oftentimes what you'll find is as you go further down those rabbit holes. I love a good internet rabbit hole.
Oh, we do too. We do too.
And do it in book form too.
Yep.
When you start to get those details, you start to realize that these big grand narratives that we tell ourselves as a country, not necessarily as individuals, about something that's like, oh, the Civil War. Everyone knows what happened in the Civil War. It's like, no, we don't.
No, you don't.
No, we don't. And just think of it like today, like how many different threads are going at all times, whether it's in our own communities here in Maryland or in Pennsylvania or what's going on around the world. And just know that same thing was happening in that time period 160 years ago, that individual families are having their own situations,
right.
And, are being pulled different ways because of politics or because of events going on in those communities. It's just embrace the complexity.
Yeah, history happens. Life happens in the nuance. Right?
Yeah,
and it happens in the details. We speak in generalities because it enables us to digest and understand what's going on, but life does not happen in generalities.
Yep.
It really doesn't.
Yep.
That's probably one of the bigger takeaways you can take out of this is that you have, and I bet you town to town, person to person, you have a lot of things that are across the board, but then suddenly this is different, that's different, and that's why we do.
Yeah,
what we
and that's
do
not
here.
to say too, like I talked a lot about like Irish mine workers rebelling against the war. There are plenty of working class Irish immigrants who served in the United States Army from Schuylkill County.
Right.
It's just like it. I just want to. I know we're way into this that I'm bringing this up, but it's just like
Go for it.
even these generalities that I'm kind of mentioning and just trying to tell this complex story. It's like it's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And it's just like one of those working class Irish enlistees in the United States Army is actually murdered in his home during the course of the war when he's home on leave. Like, it is so complex.
I love stuff like that. We got to do more true crime. We did the Lizzie Borden episode last year. Maybe we'll come back and do a Civil War true crime
There you
episode.
go.
That'd be pretty
there's
rad.
plenty of it.
Just for the record, do you think Lizzie Borden did it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then I suggest you
where we're
go
at.
back to our Halloween episode and listen to the case made by author Sarah Miller, because she turned the jury here. We went into that with that she's guilty. And by the end, 3 not guilty verdicts got dropped on this show. So, great story. Well, I think our listeners, man, if they aren't familiar with you yet, and they are now, I think they're in for a treat. You do amazing work. You have, especially I keep stressing how young you are, the short amount of time you've been among us as historians. You're somebody that I am older than, but you are a legend to me. How does this even work? But no, I hope our listeners, in fact, how do they link up with you outside of listening to this episode of the show? How do they follow you on social media? Where can they follow you if you are out and about in town doing work historically?
Yeah, so I still volunteer. I work in the tourism industry now, but I still lead tours as a volunteer for the National Museum of Civil War Medicine for their walking tours, which I highly advise folks taking. Learn about cool city of Frederick, Maryland. Fascinating history there.
Absolutely.
Also home to an unnamed national park.
That's right. Top secret. Top secret. We do not know a ranger there.
So I'm also online. You can find me at winninghistory.com. I'm on social media, Jake Wynn Public Historian on Facebook, and PA Coal Region History on Instagram.
Dude, you, like me, have many irons in the fire. Do you find...
I'm so tired.
That's what I was getting ready to ask. Do you find that you have both the exhaustion of doing that amount of work, and yet you are somehow still driven to do it?
I would say that I'm struggling a little bit with motivation these days.
That's fair.
But for good reasons. My job is definitely taking up a lot more time in a good way that I'm not able to do as much on the side.
So different working in tourism, different than working in history. You don't get to focus on just the historical tourism. It's everything.
Yeah, correct.
So it's breweries too.
Oh, I know. It's so
Frederick
hard.
gets tons of breweries.
And
brutal
travel.
to talk about. All of the great craft beverage industry in Maryland, but I do a lot of history with my job. It's enough to scratch the itch on a day-to-day basis that I used to have at the Civil War Medicine Museum. But also, it's just fun to be able to work alongside folks like yourselves.
Yeah.
Like these are the conversations that get me very excited. Like on my way here, I was just like, oh, this is awesome.
Yeah,
this is great to be able to have this kind of conversation, talking for nearly 2 hours.
I think that's the luxury of what we do, is like you get to work with your friends and colleagues and things like that. You get to hear them tell stories in one capacity. They let their hair down a little bit and they tell it another way. But I always
don't talk about letting hair down.
Dude, brother, you're talking to me. Like you have hair physically on top of your head still. I do not.
Barely.
Yeah, but
for the record.
You put the word barely in front of it. That's more than the host of this show has. But no, what I guess I'm saying is I enjoy the constant inspiration from seeing passionate storytellers around me all the time. And thank you for continuing a long line of our friends who have been on this show and been passionate about the stories. And we have in the past, we have worked with a number of our friends and found that this is something that it's a wind that will help propel us in our sails for weeks and months to come as we go to edit this and release it. We're recording it way before you're hearing it, so it'll help us through the doldrums of certain seasons and things like that. So I'll end all of this, man, with a thank you. It's been great knowing you and working with you for a decade, but thanks for finally getting here in studio and telling us a story that, honestly, I feel like if our listeners are familiar with you already, they were probably ready to hear a medicine story today or a Claire Barton story or something in there, because that's where they've seen you most, I guess, visibly for a while. But I'm glad we brought you something like this, because I know this hits you
something unique,
right where you love the most, and I think that's where we inspire people, is when we are at our most passionate. So
catch me in season 12. How about that?
That's right. No, look, you're
we'll
welcome
have
back.
You on before that.
You're welcome back on the show anytime you want. And obviously, we like to have storytellers tell stories outside of what they're known for. That wall of fame or shame, depending on how you look at it over there, it's got some storytellers that from one place, but we're here for another reason. So very excited. So lots coming up with season 5, guys. If you did not listen to our year-end episode at the end of season 4 last year, hit the brakes, go back, make sure you've got all the things you need for doomsday prep. You're going to need water, helmets, toilet paper. There's a lot coming at you in season 5, guys. I mean, like we said at episode 50, it takes a lot to get to 50 episodes. It takes a lot to get to 5 years. I mean, it's a big deal, and here we are. So we wanted it to be worth your time and not just ours, because we love doing this show. Matt and I love talking to our friends, doing research, working with our producer, Parker. We love doing this. It is a ton of work, but it is a labor of love. And we always want to make sure that it is an experience that is nothing but enjoyed and loved for you all. So when we crafted season 5, we said heavy hitters only. So we're getting it started the right way with one of our biggest heavy hitters, one of our best mates, a guy doing the fine work. So Jake Wynn from Winning History. Jake Wynn with a Y, by the way, for all of you who do not know that out there. If you're Googling Winning History, you're probably on a Charlie Sheen website. Back up, get away from the tiger blood. Winning with a Y. Jake, thank you for doing the fine works. Thank you for coming on the show, mate. It's a pleasure having you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right, guys, buckle up. Season 5 is rolling now. For our guest today, Jake Wynn. For our producer, Parker Russell. For your co-hosts, Matt Borders and Pat McGuire, saying, let's go, baby. Season 5. We'll catch you next time. Later!
Have a good night.